I'm sorry to have, I suppose you wondered where I was, Phil. But I've been busy on the phone here, and we do have our very special guest online, Nancy Lee. Good evening.
Ah, there, fellas.
Oh, Nancy, I've just been reading from an old listener in while Bruce was dialing you, and I mentioned a few names that you probably remember. Nance Martell, Joyce Varley, and Dorothy Mannix.
Oh, yes, yes.
And they were doing the women's show at AW in 1939.
Yes, yes. Nicky used to take Nance Martell was her name?
Yes, I'm reading from a Saturday program guide.
Yes, I think he used to take her out sometimes.
Did you folks work 5 or 6 days a week?
5 or 6 days.
Because you're mentioned for Chatterbox Corner on a Saturday night here.
Oh, yes, 6 days, yes, indeed. But, it was much more than that, because we used to have these big chum parties, and thousands would go to the zoo or Luna Park, or 50,000 went on a picnic to Greensboro, and we used to meet the public that way and sign autographs and things and talk to them. And I used to wear cotton frocks so that the children could cling to me and hold me with their sticky little fingers.
That's marvellous.
It was wonderful.
Lovely memories, Nancy.
Well, it was all chum spirit, and that's what I think the Middle East needs now, is some of our chum spirit.
Yes, the whole world does, Nancy.
Yes.
I had a letter from Ruth Hare from Mordialloc during the week, who wrote she joined Nicky's special club, the Flying Axe Handles.
Oh, yes.
And she has the badge, which was in the shape of an axe handle.
That's right.
She recalls going to a Saturday morning party at the Maya Mural Hall where Nicky, Nancy and Tuppy were, and she said Nancy looked so lovely in a pretty blue frock.
Oh, yes, I used to wear a lot of blue.
That would have been one of those cotton frocks.
One of the cotton frocks.
Yeah, Nicky spoke of the Merry Creek.
I couldn't afford anything else.
She writes, Nicky spoke of the Merry Creek and of living at Holden Street, North Fitzroy, with the fat aunt.
Yes, that was before we were married.
Nancy, your marriage to Nick was quite an auspicious occasion, but one veiled in a certain amount of mystery, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, indeed it was. Well, it had to be, Bruce, because we were well known by most of Melbourne, I think, at that time, and it would have been a very public wedding, and we didn't want that, because Nicky was supposed to be a little boy in Chatterbox Corner, and it would have spoiled the whole illusion had the children known that we were man and wife. So we had to keep it secret. And we were married quietly, just my mother and a couple of relations at a church in Richmond.
Nancy, in your book, or in the book, Being a Chum Was Fun,
yes.
Nicky was the sort of person, although he was very outgoing on air, he just loved to get home with you and the boys and to be as quiet and as peaceful and cut off as he could.
Yes, well, he had a very public life, and not only with through Chatterbox Corner, but with Nicky and Tuppy, breakfast session, and then he used to be called on, both Nick and Tuppy used to be called on to do straight announcing. And that was a bit difficult for them because it was a time when there were a lot of opera singers around and names that they found it very hard to pronounce.
Yes.
And when they came across a name they couldn't pronounce, they'd bang on the table.
We're talking to our very special guest, Nancy Lee in Shepparton. I can't tell you what a delight it is to have you on air, because last week we paid tribute to you and Nick, as you've probably heard through the week.
It was wonderful.
But I want to know, where did you and Nick first meet?
Well, we really first met through Manzoni's Hawaiian band, but we didn't remember each other when we met at 3AW. And when I had this wonderful job offered to me of conducting the children's session at 3AW, when His Majesty's Theatre had been burnt out, and 3AW were using the upstairs part as a studio. And Nicky was on holidays when I started, so that there was George Bills Thompson, known as Mike, and a few other people. But I didn't meet Nicky again till he came back from his holidays, and he came over and gave me a kiss and welcomed me to Chatterbox Corner.
So what year did Chatterbox Corner start, Nancy?
1933. I was passing by the theatre, and I saw 3AW written up, and I thought, as I played the ukulele and composed songs and sang in those days, I can't sing a note now, I thought, oh, no harm in going in and seeing if there's anything I can do in a children's program. And it just happened that they needed someone at that time. I'm having a little difficulty. Wait, I've got a bottle of eucalyptus in front of me. I'll just have a little sniff.
Well, Nancy, while you do that,
yes,
I want you to listen to something. You may not sing now, but in those days, you could hold a note pretty well. Have a little listen to this, Nancy.
Yes.
Why did the crocodile weep, boo-hoo, sitting on a pile of stones beside the Nile? Why did the crocodile weep, boo-hoo, sitting by the Nile in his funny style? Had he a pain in his poor little tum? No, but he wanted to be a new chum.
The old chum song. A few memories there, Nancy?
Oh, yes, I remember the day because they'd only just got the equipment in to record the things we did on the air. You see, before that, they couldn't record anything. There was nothing of the early days of Chatterbox Corner recorded, and I can remember that very well. And they were Nicky's junior stars who were playing all the instruments and things.
That's marvellous.
And they just called me in on the spur of the moment and said, and I took my ukulele in, but my voice is shaky because I'm playing the ukulele and my hands are going up and down.
Nancy, I mentioned last week, what a shame we were all robbed of the opportunity to see Nick star on television. How do you think he would have made the transition from 3UZ to Channel 9?
Oh, I think he would have been wonderful. I really do. He was wonderful to watch, to look at. You know, when I was facing him in the studio, and he had wonderful eyes, very expressive eyes, and good looking, because he was very unhappy about losing his hair. It was receding. But, however, he had gone to England and studied television and had come back and was feeling a bit nervous about it just before he died.
Would Nicky and Graham have worked together on television if they'd had the chance?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think they could have worked very well because Graham learned everything he knew from Nick.
But Nick had already been signed to a contract at Channel 9, hadn't he, before he passed away?
He was the very first one to be signed to a contract for television in Australia.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I didn't know he was the first person to be signed on a contract. When he started with Graham Kennedy, what stories did he bring home about this new radio boy?
I knew Graham because Nicky and I were doing a Saturday night program. And Graham was our record boy, we called him in those days. He used to put the records on for us. And I knew Graham, and he was a very shy, very reticent sort of boy. And when Nick came home and told me that he had chosen Graham when the other boys were called up, you know, for active service or whatever it was, for national service, and he said he'd chosen Graham, I really was standing at the sink peeling potatoes, and I remember dropping the knife and the potatoes in the sink and saying, "Not Graham," because Graham was so quiet and so shy and so well behaved, and always called me Nancy Lee. Yes, Nancy Lee. No, Nancy Lee. And it was only when after I heard him with Nick and heard the marvellous talent coming out in him and the way he responded to Nicky's humour that I realised, that he was just perfect for the job.
Was your involvement in radio at that time, were you doing a program with the two of them?
No. Oh, no. I was busy at home looking after my boys.
And of course, there you'd be very proud because both Gary and Mike have followed in Dad and Mum's footsteps.
Oh, yes, of course I have, yes.
Tell us where the boys are today, Nancy.
Well, Gary is up here, not far from where I am. I'm residing in a lovely place. I'm so happy. I can't tell you how happy I am. They're wonderful people here who run the place and look after us. And we're just like a big family, and we feel free, and it's lovely and spacious, and I've got every comfort here.
Is it like a retirement village, is it?
Yes.
That's nice for you. And Gary's working up the road at the FM station in Shepparton.
Yes, it's Sun FM.
And I spoke to Mike before Christmas. I think he's up around Noosa now, isn't he?
Yes, Noosa now. And they're both doing well and happy.
That's marvellous.
And Gary has a lovely wife, and she's just like a lovely daughter to me. She really looks after me and comes over and sees me every few days.
That's lovely to hear. Nancy, in the late 50s, you teamed with Tuppy, didn't you, on News Ed for Hunter's products, etc.?
Yes. Well, they tried to make it another Chatterbox Corner, and it was supposed to be with Graham and Tuppy and myself. But television had come in, and Graham was fascinated by that, and so he gave up radio to go into television. I would have liked to have worked with Graham, because we did an interview together down at his home, which is a nice little piece of radio. I'd like you to hear it sometime.
I'd love to hear it, Nance.
Yes, I'd like you to play it for all the chums and the people listening in. I think they'd enjoy it.
Would you make that available to us sometime?
Yes, I would.
Well, I'm running a tape over this for you tonight. I don't know how well you pick up AW in Shepparton, but something surprised me that you mentioned earlier. Bruce and I had always presumed, Nancy, that the studios had been here in La Trobe Street, but according to what you said earlier, in the 1930s they were above Her Majesty's Theatre.
Oh, yes, I can tell you the history of 3AW. Yes, they were upstairs off one of the big foyers, and there was a big room, and they had the microphone studio, and they had a studio manager called E. Mason Wood.
He later went on to produce the Caltex Theatre.
Yes, he probably did. He was in Sydney.
Right.
But in those days, he was a very strict theatrical person, and he was going to keep us all in order. And one day, I was on my own doing Chatterbox Corner by myself up in that big theatre, all by myself except for the engineer. And E. Mason Wood came in, and he saw that the microphone had been removed into the middle of the room because the engineer wanted to fix something, and he'd asked me if I could move out and sit on a stool. And I was just talking to the chums and sending birthday greetings and things, and Woody came into the room, and he said, get that microphone back to the other table and get that ukulele out of its case. He was mad because Nicky was on holidays and I was doing it on my own, and he thought that I was not caring about doing it properly with all the musical interludes and everything.
Nancy Lee, if you don't mind me asking you, back in 1933, how much did they pay you for Chatterbox Corner?
£2.10 a week.
That was hardly enough to buy the cotton frocks.
And I had to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and if we were running a competition, the postman would come in with canvas bags, I can see him now, and he would tip out great loads of mail of white envelopes with Nancy Lee on them.
That's wonderful.
And we had to go through every one in case there was a birthday greeting or a cheerio for a sick chum or something. We had to go through every one of those envelopes, and sometimes it would be quite dark at night when I would leave for home, and I wouldn't have a taxi. I couldn't afford a taxi, and I used to have to get the tram along Toorak Road and then a long walk down to my flat where I was living down by the river.
Yes. Nancy, what the other stations, I mean, we talk of Chatterbox Corner, there must have been other children's programs and identities in Melbourne at that time. Who was your strongest competition?
Well, I think perhaps, of course the ABC had their, what were they called? The
Argonauts?
Argonauts, yes. and there was Billy Bouncer later on, and he dressed the same as Nicky did, in the same sort of clothes that Nicky used to wear to the chum parties,
Yes.
which were schoolboy things with a school bag on his back and peanuts and comics and everything out.
Marvellous memories.
And I remember one day, I think I've talked about this on there, but one day at one of the big chum parties at the zoo, the taxi was there ready to take us back to the studio to do the session, and I couldn't find Nicky. And I was looking out, and here he was running around the elephant track with thousands of kids following him, hanging onto his pants, and he was holding his pants trying to keep them up.
Well, we spoke earlier of Channel 9. Now, it may not be common knowledge, but you were involved quite a lot in the early days with the breakfast program.
Yes, with Toddy. He called me poor old Nancy Lee. And I haven't got even with him for that.
Well, I don't know why he said that, because you've told us how happy you are up there in Shepparton, and let me tell you this, you're sounding so young and so vital.
Oh, am I?
Yes, you are.
Yes, well, I might be old, but I feel young.
Well, now, Bruce and I were lucky enough to be in the front row at the Camberwell Civic Centre when you launched the book and the cassette of the Chums. And, people still ring us about the book. Do you know if it's still readily available?
Well, the last time I heard of it being available was in the bargain basement in Hall's bookstore in Melbourne.
Right.
I only have one copy here, and the lovely girls who look after us here have been reading it, have been passing it from one to the other.
Yes.
So they probably all know more about me than I know myself, because I've forgotten what I've written.
Well, it was a marvellous book, and I do treasure it. And if
and the cassette too.
If you do see the book, Being a Chum Was Fun, I suggest you add it to your collection.
Nancy, have you got a special message for all the chums who'd be listening to you tonight?
Oh, I have a special message, yes. They gave me the happiest time in my life, the most thrills anyone could have, and I loved my invalid chums. I really began that Invalid Corner Club, and it's still going, I believe, and I was not well enough to go along. They had a celebration, and they did ask me to go along, but I've had a few strokes, and I've come out of them very well. I have a short memory sometimes.
Well, my word, you've proved it. You haven't. You've certainly got a good memory tonight.
Yes, not too bad. I can remember things that happened years ago, but perhaps 5 minutes ago, I might have a mental block.
Well, I think it has been very gracious of you to speak to us, because I really had to twist your arm to come on air, didn't I, Nancy?
You did indeed.
Well, it's been a great pleasure of mine, and I must say I was a fan of yours, still am, and of Nicky and the gang in Chatterbox Corner, and I'd sincerely like to thank you, Nancy, for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you, darling.
And Nancy, all I can say to you from my heart is, and you've been such a precious friend through the years to so many of us, may you live happily ever after.
Thank you, darling.
Nancy Lee, our very special guest tonight on Remember When.
Bye-bye.
Crocodile weep, ooh, ooh,